Another episode of Hero in 3, 2, 1.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off.
Blast off on another episode of HEROparanormal Podcast. Broadcasting from the base of La Madre Mountain, south of Area 51. Bringing the most rip-roaringest, never-boringest, esoteric podcast deep dive. Today's guest exemplifies the study of esoterica much like past masters. Yes, our guest is none other than Jonny Enoch, serving as a clinical hypnotherapist, esoteric researcher, and writer. He has an unquenchable thirst for knowledge, which is great for a podcast like this. Because any direction we choose, stand assured, Jonny is going to be sure to hit it home and get us there. Not only has he been researching ancient history, hidden symbolism, and occult subjects with tenacity for over 20 years, but his quest for answers about the unknown has led him on travel adventures all over the world. He nailed the pre-COVID crisis and was able to travel when everybody else was hunkered down before it even hit. And he did so with such ninja travel accuracy. I was wondering, where's the crystal ball, man? I'm very jealous. He is currently writing a book on ancient consciousness technologies and lost civilizations. And trust me, I can't wait to ask him about it. Jonny Enoch, welcome to the HEROparanormal Podcast.
I'm doing great, Ryan. Thanks so much for having me on.
Great. This is sort of your specialty, so this is just amazing for me to touch base with you. I wanted to kind of start off because we have all these issues with protests and BLM and, history not recognizing African Americans the way it should. And I just wanted to throw something at you. I'm sure you're knowledgeable of it. And that is Beverly Randolph. What is your knowledge of him? And do you believe that he is an African American character in your studies and kind of all the esoteric that, like many, has just kind of been overlooked?
Yeah, well, Paschal Beverly Randolph was a very important figure to not only the spiritualist movement, but, he was an esoteric genius of sorts, and he was also involved with sex magic and all kinds of experimental mysticism. He made a great contribution into these areas as an occultist. And when you look at how he was coming up with his ideas, I have a friend out in Vancouver. His name is Chris Bennett, and he's written some great books like Liber 420 and Sex, Drugs, and the Bible, where he's actually explored the ideas of Paschal Beverly Randolph entering into these states of mysticism using cannabis, hashish, and other sorts of entheogenic spiritual mechanisms, which is very interesting. But with Randolph, I suppose that you could say that not only was it a brave territory for him to enter, but I just think that he's one of those people sometimes that gets overlooked in our ideas of Western mysticism, and he's done some very important work in that area.
Yes, I agree. It's one of those strange cases, which there's so many of. So, there is some grounding there, and I don't want to get political and go into the BLM movement or any of that, and I'm sure you don't either, Jonny. But I'm going to just delve deeply, at least as deeply as I can, and kind of use your genius and your brain to my advantage while I've got you on the line.
You're too kind. You got the same genius, Ryan. It takes one to know one. You know, I love this. It's like minds coming together.
Oh, thank you. These ancient intelligences, which are sort of a specialty of yours, in the form of tricksters roaming the southwest of the United States, what, if anything, will the future hold for these small groups of like dark practicing magical entities, in your opinion?
Okay, so when you say groups of dark practicing magical entities, are we talking about group types of magic? Are we talking about multidimensional entities? Or how do you want to look at that?
You're absolutely right. I guess I'm just kind of throwing them all in the laundry basket and handing them to you. And that's kind of not really the easiest way to answer a question. So I guess both the observers that worship, witness, and follow these entities, and then I guess the dimensional entities themselves.
Well, there are many groups out there that have many different intentions. And these groups are held together through something called an egregore. So what an egregore is, for those of you out there who are new to these subjects, an egregore is sort of like an algorithm, and it's sort of like an encryption protocol. So let's say you wanted to send a message to somebody, like even WhatsApp, and you have encrypted messages, or back in the day, people talked a lot about PGP, and you have this encryption key. Well, certain groups work under these egregorious energies and ideas and thought forms that surround them. And no doubt there are very powerful currents in the world right now, but these sort of systems and esoteric ideas and teachings go back a long way, Ryan. They go back way into the ancient world. And there's always been two types of ideas and two types of thought out there, things that are practiced. You have the esoteric, which of course, you know, means secret teachings and ideas, the same as the word occult, for example, which just means hidden or clandestine, you know, the hidden teachings. Doesn't mean cult. It's not somebody that's got a big property with a yellow school bus where they're singing Kumbaya and passing around the offering plate. You know, it's got this idea that people have lumped it in as something negative, but something can be occult for a good reason if it's not appreciated or people don't understand a sort of sacred knowledge. And then we have exoteric knowledge. And exoteric knowledge is sort of just something that's out and about for everybody. So the idea is that there are all kinds of secret teachings and ways of unlocking abilities and understanding how the universe works and peeking behind the curtains that have been reserved for a very long time for initiates and people who are of a specific caliber. So before we go into what is light or what is dark or, you know, going in between these two ideas, let me ask you something. Have you ever heard of the term mystic?
Sure. It's kind of thrown around often in areas like Sedona, but yeah, you bet.
Okay, so when you get the word mystic, that actually comes back to one of the oldest mystery schools that we have, that was the greatest of all of antiquity. It was the Eleusinians, the Eleusinian mystery schools, or the Dionysian artificers. And to become a mystic, that was associated with being a mysty. You would have these inner and outer circles, like the epotes, but to come into the inner circle, the mysty was someone who could see through the mist. So that's what becoming a mystic was like. So you might say that all around us at all times, we are surrounded by these different realities, and atoms vibrating in different ways. And this is where we get the idea of relativity from. I mean, what your reality is relative to. And so each of us has an ability to perceive reality a little differently. And you might say that we have this sort of a gatekeeper. The gatekeeper is, you know, allowing us through what we perceive, through our optic nerve, through the visual cortices, through how reality is decoded. We have a certain gatekeeper that keeps us sane. Now, if that gatekeeper too rapidly, if it starts to come undone, it's like not to get too graphic here, but it's like a sphincter. It kind of keeps everything in. But if too much comes and floods, this will change your ego. It will change your personality. Everything will change around you. So it is absolutely necessary that sometimes these things are taken from different perceptions, because reality is subjective. Reality is decoded differently for every person. So a lot of these teachings, which have been kept away, it is for those who are ready for it. It's been put there. It's been hidden in allegory. It's been hidden there for a certain reason, because, you know, once these things and these truths come to people, if a person has a very fragile understanding, or they don't have the correct intellectual capacity or proclivities, that it can start to, you know, take a person and challenge their psyche. So needless to say, for a very, very long time, we've had a great understanding on this planet of multidimensional realities and how to understand this reality and a science of it. So these schools of thought, they do work with various groups and beings and intelligences. So a lot more knowledge that, you know, in the past has been off limits will become available on, you know, the bigger stories. You know, people will start talking more about extraterrestrials. They will start talking about the norm of certain technologies that allow us to access different states of consciousness in the mind. But the finer tuned instruments of these things might become more obscure as we enter into this world of, you know, the cancel culture, for example. People might be moving into this area where they might say, why has certain knowledge, you know, be hidden into this group or that group? So it might actually go more obscure into the background. So again, the bigger items of the news stories will come forward, but the smaller details will move back, if that makes sense.
Yes, and I think we've all sort of noticed that there has been a shift, and it's been going on for quite a while, and it's so cliche talking about The Secret and Oprah Winfrey, but in reality, the New Age has kind of embraced this.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know, you were talking about statues earlier, and it's very interesting because all of our ancient cultures and civilizations, they all had statues. They had controversial figures. They had gods and goddesses. And for the most part, what the wise would do is the wise, when they would notice all these people bowing before the Priapus of Pan and worshiping, let's say, a statue of, even if you go to the Vatican, Ryan, you'll notice at the Vatican, people are kissing the feet off of St. Peter. And St. Peter, it says in the Catholic Encyclopedia, is just Zeus. It's Jupiter, the ruler of Cassiopeia. So the wise have always said that when people were bowing before these statues, they understood that they were the personification of great truths. They were the personification of astrotheology. For example, St. Peter as Zeus is really Jupiter in the pageantry in his life between the gods and goddesses. There was an encoded story there also about the movement of the stars and celestial mechanics, and this also allowed them to understand a greater science of life. One day we will understand that our sciences of today, just like what we have with Oppenheimer, who looked at the ancient Vedas to learn about the atomic bomb, or Niels Bohr and Erwin Schrödinger looked into the Hindu scriptures of the Bhagavad Gita, and they discovered that here we had quantum mechanics, discovered that all of our sciences come from the esoteric. They come from the occult sciences. That's where they derive from. And, you know, when it comes to these statues, we have to look at these as symbols of our growth and evolution. And you know, instead of tearing them down, we could put a plaque near them, giving them more context. Or we could put, if we have a controversial figure, put a statue up next to it that shows our diversity and our strength. You know, if there's George Washington, let's say, if you had an issue with those times, we could put up next to it Martin Luther King Jr. or Bruce Lee or some of these other great American figures. I don't know if you're aware of, in Japan, they have a process called kintsukurō, where they see an imperfect statue or a sculpture or a bowl, and if it has cracks in it, it's seen as a thing of beauty because they repair it with gold in the cracks. And the more imperfections that it comes at, the more beautiful a thing it really is.
Beautifully said, and so true. It seems like there's a lot of people are very polarized, and they have a hard time accepting others. And unfortunately, they don't realize that the omnitheism is not a negative thing. It's not a bad thing.
No, that's the thing. I mean, once you take a step back, if you talk about omnideism or polytheism or any of these concepts, once you take a step back, you will realize that all of our religions and all of our traditions come from a divine spark. They all have a source that leads back into a great pattern. Once we detach our opinions and our perceptions and concepts about them, and, you know, to bring it back to the concept that you talked about at the very beginning, when we talk about ancient intelligences and we talk about groups and mystical traditions and magical orders, let's look at Freemasonry, for example. Freemasonry, and I'll go on record saying this, even though a lot of Masons will say it's not a religion. The Freemasonry is based on the most ancient religion in the world. If you look at where the concepts of it come from and its traditions, it is the last great keeper of the mysteries. It's not the only group that has these sort of keys, and it teaches its initiates. You see, this is what a lot of people get lost and they get confused with when they start looking at the Masonic orders or any of these sort of offsprings like the Golden Dawn, or even people looked over at the Ordo Templi Oriens or OTO or one of those sort of groups. The keys and the system that they use is they use a system of allegories and symbols and whatnot that you get as a classical education. And the classical education is like the trivium and the 7 liberal arts and sciences to look at these sort of things and to look at the universe. But as you look at these ancient systems like the Kabbalah or any of these practices that came back, these were many of our groups that broke off and branched out from these. They seeded all the major religions on our planet. And really quickly, not to get off too much in a tangent, because I know we don't have a whole lot of time to explore all those things today, but you know who founded Christianity? Constantine?
Of course, yeah, of course.
When Constantine founded Christianity, he talks about seeing something called the Chi-Rho or the Chi-Rho cross. And I don't know if you've ever seen this, Ryan, but on the side of a church, an Orthodox church, you may have seen like a P with an X in it. It's a special type of cross. And we're told this comes from the Christos. But actually, this is a 2,500-year-old symbol that was used by the secret societies of the Holy Roman Empire. And Constantine's father, Chloros, who we know is buried in York, England, with an alchemical, ever-burning mercury lamp that can burn for like 2,000 years as a symbol of the secret society he belonged to. The secret society he belonged to in Rome was called the Collegium Artificam, or the College of Artificers, the College of Masons, the College of Craftsmen. And so when you look at that, this secret society is the same as the Dionysian Artificers. This is the group that the Knights Templars came in contact with, and the Templar traditions that were passed down. All the early Egyptian kings were called the artificers. They wore the apron. They were part of the priestcraft. They held the mysteries for thousands of years on this planet. And, you know, in every cycle that comes along, there's great changes. There's great knowledge that is preserved behind the scenes and great concepts according to the cycles and ages that we're in that are there. So these keys, these practices, these principles, these concepts that have been seeded by the mystery schools into our religions and practices, they're all around us. And it's fine-tuned into an ancient science and system in our universe.
I think it's so amazing that the wealth of knowledge that many are letting just go right through their fingertips is phenomenal, especially in these times where we have it at our fingertips with the internet. An interesting thing, Jonny, you're doing such a great job in following in the steps of the masters, and I think, you know, in your opinion, I'm gonna hit you with some questions I think that are, are somewhat telling. Maybe I could, in my humble knowledge, but interestingly, we have in Egyptian times we have Thoth or Toth, and then fast forward we have Aleister Crowley and his Pocket Swiss tarot deck, also based on the same figure historically. We have blue avians, which appear to be somewhat similar. Are there connections that you've found through your research, or is this just random possibility?
Okay, well, let's explore the idea of Thoth or Toth, and let's talk about that for a moment. So, when you go back to what Plutarch said, and I won't go into some long historical lecture and bore your listeners, but when you go back to Plutarch, he said all the gods of ancient Egypt were the antediluvian, which means pre-flood, pre-cataclysmic, kings who were deified or made into gods after death. So what that means is we had this giant cataclysmic destruction on the earth around 12,000 years ago. It wasn't the first one. And you might say that there was sort of an ancient technology on our planet that used the geomagnetic grids, things like pyramids and obelisks, to experiment with energy, much like we might see with HARP and other means of manipulating these areas. So this could have very much caused a lot of consequences by experimenting with electromagnetic energy and gravity. A lot of knowledge was lost. A lot of knowledge was rediscovered by the dynastic Egyptians. So they did personify various symbolism into these gods and ideas. And now, when you talk about Thoth, one of the things that's very interesting about Thoth is you'll see that he's a god portrayed with the head of an ibis bird. And there's a very important king. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, this is the most important king in Egyptian history to most people that look in the mystery traditions. And his name is Tutmosis III. And Tutmosis III, he was around the 18th dynasty, and he's very important to Freemasonry. He's extremely important to the Rosicrucians. The Rosicrucians consider him to be their deputy Grand Master, who's an immortal who's still alive today, running the show from sort of a celestial or astral lodge. In fact, if you go to Amorc, you'll see that his statue in California is in front of there. Now, the thing with Tutmosis III, if you go to his school, where, if you go into Egypt, you'll find a place called Hermiopolis, which is associated with Hermes or Thoth. Today, you'll see these two giant statues of Jehoti, who is sort of this, if you want to look over at like an ape, sort of a figure that means to learn. Jehoti symbolizes to learn something. But the ibis bird, which you have to understand about the ibis, and I'm bringing this up because Tutmosis he's got the name Thoth in his name. It's in his cartouche of why that's there. And Thoth is also where you get the English word thought from, which is associated with thinking and intellectual ideas and Mercury and all those sort of ideas. So the ibis bird, it is a very wise bird. It means to be born wise, because the ibis knows how to avoid storms. It knows the perfect place to land to get the worm in the ground. It knows how to avoid danger. It's associated with these sorts of intelligences, just to have them naturally. So Tutmosis was a very, very interesting title for him to have, and that's a long story about who he was. We could do a whole show about all the secrets and things he knew, and his aunt Hatshepsut, because at that time when he was there was the age of Amun, and to not have that as a part of his title, like Amenhotep, it tells you it's fitting that he was a very important initiate of a special class of the mystery schools. So Tutmosis, with him having that connection to Thoth and the ibis bird's colors are really white, black, and red. Okay, so there's something very important there that you have to know, because the color that the mystery school initiates would write in, if he was writing to another initiate, he would write in black. And this was only reserved for those who understood the mysteries. It's just like, Ryan, that if you look over where Israel or Jerusalem is, which there's all sorts of secrets in that place. That's why it's very controversial, why it's fought over, that when you look at where Israel is, it's smack dab in the middle of a geocentric landmass if you look up from space. And when you look at the area of Jerusalem, you divide that in half. All the languages that are written to the east of Jerusalem, if you look, they're written right to left, towards the heart. And according to the mystery traditions, any esoteric knowledge or secret knowledge was always written towards the heart. And if you look over to the west, all the languages west of Jerusalem, look at the languages. They're written left to right. And all the knowledge that you would see that was exoteric or for everyone else, the profane, was written away from the heart. So just like the mystery traditions taught Moses, he would write red, and this comes from the ibis bird, for the initiates, black for the initiates, but write red for everybody else. Which, again, look at our traditions. Even if you go to school, you use a black pen and a red pen, et cetera, et cetera. But the color black is also very important there, because this also is associated with alchemy. The ancient name for Egypt was never Egypt. That comes from the Greeks. They called it Aegyptos, and it came from a little stele in an area called Memphis. The ancient name for Egypt was Kem, or Kemet, which meant the black land. And it's where we get the words chemistry and alchemy from. And that's a whole story in itself, but with alchemy, there is a process where you take these black materials that would flood up from the Nile, and you would turn them into a sort of a white gold. And again, this is where you get the idea of Nicholas Flamel's Philosopher's Stone and all the alchemy in Europe that came down from the Arabs, from alchemia, that they were doing this practice to get immortality, and you get the legends of Saint Germain and Paracelsus and everyone else. Well, there is also a practice in Europe when you see these statues. If you see statues in Europe that are black statues of Madonna or Jesus or any of these holy people, this is an alchemical secret of turning these materials. And the crazy part about this is that the materials turn from black to red, then to white when the process of alchemy takes place. So these colors are very important. Also pay attention to the colors of the Egyptian flag today. However, when we come to these avian beings that you talk about, most certainly we get the idea of Horus, where we also get the name horizon from. The sun rises on the Horus has risen, the horizon. Or that's how many Horuses, how many hours you have in a day. These messengers, these falcons, were also seen as these sort of creatures that could bring messages back and forth between these two worlds. And when we look at the Egyptian underworld and everything else, the duat. However, when you talk about what you said with blue avians, I understand there has been a lot of talk about that. And there have been many authors, years before some of the popular people today were talking about it, that talked about extraterrestrial contactee experiences with beings that they would call blue avians. One of them, I believe, was Bonnie Meyer. Another was Ashiana Dean. Ashiana Dean was a contactee that wrote many, many books. From what I have seen from people discussing this online, that I don't know if people are recycling those old stories and information. They seem similar in context and ideas, but there's so many different types of beings that people have talked about with extraterrestrials. If you look at the context of all these experiences over the years, it is very interesting. Do I think they could be the same as the ones mentioned in ancient Egypt? I can't tell you that for sure because obviously I don't know the full context of their contactee experiences. I do know one thing, that there is a lot of symbolism and truth personified into the characteristics of something like the ibis and then applied to a person. One last thing I want to say about this is very similar to, you get a story like someone like Jesus or Mithra or Zoroaster or Dionysus. Did these people exist? Some will argue, well, in their legends, like even the legend of Samson with cutting off his hair or his locks, this is personified into the coronas of the sun, cutting off the locks. In the mysteries, it's always viewed that if somebody was a very important person, you would personify or symbolize something into their story or their legend. It doesn't mean that they didn't exist because their life events are symbolized by the cycles of the sun and astrology. It just means that this was a great compliment. So that sort of differentiates the two, if that makes sense.
I think it does. At least they both seem to have similarities, and like I'm glad that you brought other theologies in to kind of explain that. Jonny, where do you think this is headed as far as the esoteric and the UFO or seeming UFO disclosure that we've seen so prevalent in the media lately?
Well, I would say that if you see more UFO disclosure in the media, that it is a good sign that people are at least opening their minds to the subject matter. I see it as the fast food of disclosure, the things that we see. It's like the McDonald's of disclosure. So there's a lot of people talking about the Tic Tac video, or they're on the fence. They're not sure whether oh my God, could somebody have said something in the New York Times that we've had off-world vehicles and we've been working on them? Of course we've been working on off-world vehicles. You had guys like Bob Lazar, Gene Huff, and John Lear, and all them talking about S4, Dreamland, Area 51, where he talks about these 9 hangars. And in one of the hangars, there was one that was like a Vimana, an ancient Vimana, and then another that was like a perfect saucer-style UFO with no right angles. And you had all sorts of disclosure over the years come up from Ben Rich from Lockheed Skunk Works, saying that, you know, when we talk about technology, we already have enough technology to take ET home. I mean, how many serious, credible people do you need to come out to tell us that this stuff is real? It's not until, like, the mainstream media gives us a stamp. I'm not one of those people that is holding my breath over the big-time disclosure. I think that a lot of politicians come out in the news, whether, you know, it's John Podesta talking about UFOs or a Clinton or Trump or Rubio or one of them mentioning UFOs. I think a lot of them have campaign managers that will come out and they will say, this is a good way to get yourself on the news, to say that if you get elected, you'll look into this. It's harmless to your campaign, and you might as well say it. Do they actually believe in UFOs at the end of the day? I don't know. Most certainly you could ask someone like Grant Cameron about that, or, you know, like a Steve Bassett or something like that, who are out there looking at politicians and taking what they say to heart and following up on it. For me, I personally think what's going to happen is that how it's going to happen during this decade is that you're slowly going to get more drip drop. You will get an idea when we put up the James Webb Telescope, when it replaces the Hubble. You'll start getting confirmation that nearby that we have life on other planets and other solar systems that act like ours. It's going to be like when you replace the Hubble telescope altogether, and when we look at James Webb, it's going to be like somebody who needs glasses. We all know someone like that walks around that is seeing everything blurry and they don't see anything. Then all of a sudden they go get their eyes fixed and they put on a new pair of glasses and they're like, oh my God, that blurry picture now has somebody in it waving at me. And what you'll find is that you're going to find private companies out there, like even right now where you have Elon Musk, who's he's very protected in what he does and very directed in as far as his efforts. And you have guys like Jeff Bezos and others that are in a race right now, these private corps that are putting their bids in, and that will give us the tech to go explore these places. I think it's going to be very much like they're going to put it into our hands, so we have this Christopher Columbus-like experience where we're going out there, we're discovering them. But I can tell you right now, Ryan, I don't care what people think right now of me saying this, but not only have we been visited for a very long time, I know that for a fact. Every one of our ancient religions, every one of our cultures is indicative of that, but a lot of what happens on our planet today is being dictated from what's going on about 3,000 light years away from here. And in fact, our visitors that come here that are watching us like a great zoological experiment, they have all sorts of different intentions. There's different groups here working with different areas of the planet for different reasons, but they also watch things on Earth. They watch Earth TV.
I happen to know for a fact that they watch the Super Bowl, and they watch other things, and they're fascinated by our music, and they're fascinated by us.
I'm really glad that you bring up the Super Bowl, because it has become a bit of a ritual in and of itself. But it does seem that these sports arenas, ever since the Coliseum, have been areas of interest. Not going down that path necessarily. I wanted to get back to how funny it is that the people, like you said, Elon Musk, this recent project and the anticipation. I have friends at NASA. I get it. I love it. It's a proud moment. But at the same time, the populace has no idea what we're doing.
Yeah, it's a crazy world at the moment. We're going through some changes. We got to look at it as we're going through a growth and an evolution. And I know that it's going to be scary for people at times on this great shift that we're going through, but we have to go into our hearts, we have to go into our minds and realize that we chose to be here at this particular time. You can say we're going to be sped up. We're going to be going through some massive changes, especially after the fall. And it is very amazing that a lot of what we see, even with these different sports arenas and people getting very emotional about that, is it just goes to show that thinking is hard work. A lot of people, we've come to this point where we've realized a lot of people don't like to do their own thinking. They like the media or another group to think for them and tell them what to think and what to do. I think even more so than ever at this time, it's a good lesson for us to remember that we should think at least one original thought a day. And maybe it is a good time for us to realize that the only way out is in, that when you want answers, you get them in quietude. That's what I believe.
Quietude. Great word. Quietude is a great word.
Yeah, yes, it is, Ron. There's an old saying, it's old wisdom that says, be still and know. And I believe that whether you're an esoteric or you're a skeptic or whoever you are, no matter what you're going through in your life, you can get a lot of healing by going into nature or just by quieting your mind, by going into your heart, by just really moving into that place of this center within yourself and within the universe. And a lot of assurance will come to you.
That is great. Johnny, it's so rare to have someone so genuine and so genuinely dedicated to the craft of researching esoteric history of humanity. Thanks so much for coming and chatting. Johnny, where can listeners support you, your efforts, and keep up with your projects?
Well, thanks so much for having me on and for the kind words, Ryan. And again, it's a real pleasure. And it takes one to know one. For people that want to find out about my work, they can go to my website at www.metaphysicalsource.com. They can follow me on Instagram at Esoteric Johnny, or of course on Facebook at Jonny Enoch. And with that being said, I think everyone listening to this podcast today should like it, subscribe, share it with your friends, and keep listening to Ryan. He's doing great work.
Oh, thank you, Johnny. In humble servitude. Thanks again, my man. All the best until we speak again.
Thank you. Right back at you.
Jonny Enoch. Whether it's on Gaia, the Travel Channel, metaphysicalsource.com, talk about wishing we could spend the rest of the weekend talking about this stuff with such a great guy. Extremely helpful knowledge. Jonny Enoch, please support him. Jump on over to metaphysicalsource.com and help a brother out. His research is for all of us, and I, for one, well, I'm grateful. If you haven't hopped on over to HEROparanormal.com, please do. I'll be grateful for that too. We have all kinds of fun merchandise, and we're adding new stuff all the time. Like I said, we have all kinds of stuff there, all the archives there for you to listen to. In fact, I'm going to be putting on my wife's product, known as Spice, S-P-Y-C-E. It is a all-natural organic bronzer, the only one I know of. Won't hurt your skin, built to win. You'll look like you'll be tanning all day, but the truth is you've been working hard, reading your library and finding the secrets of reality. We'll be sure to put more products on there if they pass the smell test. Until next time, keep your eyes to the skies, feet on the ground, but don't forget to take a look around.
Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Look, Visine for the third eye. It's levels and you can catch me where the birds fly. Blast off in the time machine, blowing on that light green straight line of beams. Beezy, take it easy what they tell me. Boy, I'm so deep, not even Lucifer can help me. And I'm going so hard, not even Lucifer can stop. I ain't with this pimping, I ain't with that simping. Can't you see we on a mission, baby? Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine. Blast off, blast off, blast off, blast off. Come blast off in my time machine. Third eye feeling like an Visine.